everybody, to the Gay Liberation Network's live call-in show on PMTV, Channel 21. This evening, we're going to be talking about our upcoming action on Sunday, which is to support abortion on demand. And the Gay Liberation Network is a direct action, Chicago-based group that is focused around LGBT rights as well as labor and the intersections with the variety, all of the things that make up all of us, and that includes women's rights. So that's the reason why we'll be talking about abortion on demand tonight with some folks from the Democratic Socialist Alliance.
Hi, my name is Laura Culinary. I'm from the Democratic Socialists of America. We have a chapter in Chicago, and we are part of the Socialist Feminist Working Group that has been working in a coalition of other local organizations to put on this counter-protest. And I'm very fun.
And you're also with the Feminist Socialist Working Committee?
Yeah.
Great. We're going to move right into our announcements, and first up is the information on this demonstration that we have on Sunday. It is the counter-protest of a pro-life group, March for Life Chicago, that's happening. We will be meeting our group at 1 p.m. on Sunday at 219 South Dearborn, which is Federal Plaza. It's also the Dirksen Building. Next week, there will be the anniversary of the inauguration of President Trump, and we will be out in the street in front of Trump Tower protesting the years of this struggle. Saturday the 19th at 12 noon. And here on your screen is information on the Democratic Socialists of America, who are joining us here on the GLN, Gay Liberation Network live call-in show. And so let's talk about, on Sunday, you know, what is the message that we try to put out to the group of folks that are gathered for the March for Life?
Yeah, so we are obviously a pro-choice group. That's sort of the most important part. We're counter-protesting the March for Life, which is a pro-life group. It's a really, really large protest. They bring in thousands. They're bussed in. Often they have sort of powerful speakers. They're very well funded. We are opposed to that. We live in a pro-choice city, in a pro-choice state, in a pro-choice nation. And so this is the law of the land, and also we believe in more than that. We believe that everyone should have access to a safe and legal abortion. Everyone should have access to health care for free. That's a sort of basic of the socialist standpoint. We believe in Medicare for all, and as part of Medicare for all, we believe that abortion and reproductive justice are a part of that.
Yeah. One of the chants we do is abortion is health care. Health care is a right.
Mm-hmm. So we are showing up in opposition to what they stand for, which is, of course, control over other people's bodies, women's bodies especially. We just want to let them know that they aren't unopposed. They don't just get to walk freely on our streets and advocate for things that we don't want and that harm people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and our other sort of thing we're focusing on this year particularly is the hashtag abortion saves lives. That's really the case. If you look at cases before Roe v. Wade passed, when abortion was illegal in many states, millions of women would go and get illegal abortions, and many hundreds of them would die. Many more would have terrible complications, and it was really a threat to health. People who need abortions will continue to get them, regardless of whether it's legal or not, and the important thing is that we believe it should be safe and that it's not really any of our business to question anyone's motives for getting one.
Yeah.
We value the life of the parent just as much as as this other life. So, and I would also like to add that the criminalizing of abortion that affects lives. That costs lives. Not So the arguments that the March for Life put forward are. We think are weak, and we've got some images from last year's march and some of the slogans and things that are shared there, and we can talk through those. And so you'll be seeing those on your screen as we continue to talk. The circumstances of someone who's seeking an abortion here in Chicago are very different than where they are, than some other places in the country, and yet it still is, it's a difficult thing. There's protesters at the clinic sites where there are abortions, and so what thoughts do you have about the circumstances of getting an abortion here in Chicago and the area?
Yeah, absolutely. In Chicago still, we do have, the same people who are going to be protesting on Sunday against a right to choose will protest outside of clinics. A lot of people involved in our organization and in the coalition that we're working in are part of Illinois Choice Action Team and the clinic, who are clinic escorts. So they go there just to escort people from their cars into the clinic sometimes because they're being yelled at, they're being harassed. Those can lead to extremely dangerous situations. We've seen cases throughout the country in the last few years where these protesters have gotten aggressive and violent and even attempted to shoot clinics or murdered people who perform abortions. And then also it's difficult to access. 75% of people who need an abortion are actually low income. So they already are having terrible access to healthcare in most cases. It's very expensive. And further than that, actually, there's a federal amendment, the Hyde Amendment, that prohibits Medicaid money being used for an abortion. So most people who need one, when they're low income and they already have limited access, actually do not have the funds to pay for that and can't use their own healthcare. In some states around the Midwest, you're not allowed to use your health insurance if you have federal health insurance at all for an abortion. So there's all of our shout out to our federal employees who are currently working without pay. They also work for health insurance that doesn't cover this essential healthcare need.
And another aspect of that is religious hospitals where they are allowed to refuse service on religious grounds. So there have been cases in multiple states, but especially in the Midwest, since a lot of hospitals in various states in the Midwest are religious hospitals, where service is refused to women and other pregnant people who would need an abortion or something along the lines of an abortion to save their lives. So we're talking people who are at some point in their pregnancy, whether they want it or not, where there's a complication that puts their life in danger, and they'll just be turned away. They will not perform the necessary medical procedures to save that life because they view it as harming the life of the fetus. So that's another aspect of it, which just isn't okay because it shouldn't be possible to put the life of another person in danger just because of your religious beliefs. If you're going to be a medical professional, if you're going to be a doctor, that's your job. You have to put that aside. You have to put your beliefs aside to take care of this person that's coming to you for help. So.
Right. This is a live call-in show, and we invite you to participate in the conversation that we're having here of abortion on demand. The number is at the bottom of your screen, 312-738-1060, and we do invite your calls. And so if you are, seeking, we're in a tri-state area. There's other Illinois other jurisdictions than Illinois nearby. I know that some people come from other states in order to access services. Why is that? Because of where the clinics are located, or is that because of state laws? And can we talk about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a combination of both, actually. Part of it has to do with 90% of the counties in the United States do not have an abortion clinic. So a lot of people have to go out of their own county in order to access either a clinic or a hospital or a doctor's office that will give them an abortion. So already the access is extremely limited, and the sort of goal of the anti-choice movement in the past few decades, since Roe v. Wade was made the law of the land, was to chip away at that slowly and say, well, you might have the legal right to an abortion, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to get it without having to travel. Wisconsin, for instance, a lot of people come into Chicago to get an abortion who would otherwise do so in Wisconsin because they have a waiting period. So what happens is you have to come in, you have to get an ultrasound, you have to get a very condescending talk from a doctor that's actually a state-sponsored language that's supposed to talk about basically discouraging you from having an abortion, and then you have to wait for another 24 hours in order to actually get the procedure done. So if you're already traveling, that means you have to travel and then stay there overnight and then get it done 24 hours later, which just adds up to the inaccessibility of it. It keeps you from being able to, it adds to the cost. You have to take that time off of work. You've got to get a hotel or a motel room. The goal is to make it so difficult that people won't attempt it. So a lot of times people from Wisconsin or from Indiana or from Iowa or from Missouri will end up coming into Chicago because it's actually worthwhile to take that longer trip to get up here because you can take that, if you're coming from Wisconsin, especially on public transit, you can get your abortion and then go home and not have to go through that waiting period. We are also seeing in Ohio, Indiana, Iowa, things like heartbeat bills that are meant to ban abortion after the detection. You're able to detect a fetal heartbeat, which is at about 6 weeks, which is far before most people know that they're pregnant. So the idea of that sort of legislation is to say, well, it's still technically legal, but in practice, it's completely inaccessible. And so those are some of the reasons why I might contribute to people coming to Chicago in order to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mary, you mentioned a statistic about people coming to Illinois to get abortions.
Yeah, about 5,000 I said come to Chicago, I believe it was. Laura really covered the bases there, but it just people going out of their way to access something that they need. And I think it really shows how important it is if people are willing to travel far from their homes, far from maybe their family or their support group or their support centers, just to get something that they need or that they want. That this isn't just some frivolous thing that if it becomes harder to access, people are just going to throw up their hands and say, oh, well, I guess I'm just not going to get my abortion like I planned this weekend. But it just shows how vital it is and how desperate some people are willing to get. I mean, in the past, before Roe v. Wade, there were so many deaths because we had women going to back alley abortions, shady people in shady places just to get the help that they needed because they were so scared, and just the limitations that are put on abortions in the neighboring states and neighboring counties. It's just pushing women back to that place where they are just pushed back and further into a corner, and we don't want that.
Well, and even here in Illinois, it's not right that, most healthcare is delivered at your doctor's office. You're going to the OB/GYN for your pregnancy anyway. It should be much easier just to get why do you have to go to a clinic to get, to a separate place to get this procedure done? So
And a lot of that has to do with actually, it's been a strategic movement over the past few decades to make this steadily more difficult. We're now actually in a really dangerous place for pro-choicers because finally anti-choicers have what they want, which is a conservative majority on the Supreme Court. Supreme Court justices who have pledged to overturn Roe v. Wade, or who they believe will go through with overturning Roe v. Wade, and that's an ultimate goal for them. But in the meantime, they haven't been sitting on their laurels. What they've been doing is passing regulations at the state and local level to say, oh, well, you can only perform an abortion at this clinic if you have admitting privileges to a hospital. Or, oh, the clinic hallways have to be this wide, so all of a sudden all of these clinics in Texas can't perform abortions because of a thing that's ostensibly been done because it's good for the woman or it's good for safety, but really these are just ways that they have used to subtly chip away at our rights and at our ability to have health care.
Right, and to close clinics and block access, and there's a long way to go in Illinois here. But you mentioned the Supreme Court and the Roe v. Wade decision. So the Roe versus Wade decision was found in 1973. Also a conservative court. I think it was 6 of the judges were Republican, appointed and considered conservative. The Chief Justice was considered to be a conservative. And indeed, there were 3 Democrats on that, Democrat-appointed justices, and one of them actually wrote against the Roe v. Wade decision. So what was there was a lot going on at that time, leading up to 1973. To allow that to occur, where you have a conservative court that's faced cases like this before. I mean, abortion wasn't a new topic, and kind of what went into that moment.
Yeah. So this was a moment that really came from organizers on the ground had been fighting this for so long. Actually, Mary was just mentioning to me a little bit about the Jane Collective in Chicago.
They were active from 1969 to 1973. It was basically a collective of women in the Chicago area. So it was started by a student at the University of Chicago, and basically it was just a collective of women. They all went by the name Jane, and they provided access to abortion to anybody who needed it. So at that time, a lot of the people that were performing abortions, they charged a lot of money. So back then it was like they'd charge $1,000. There's a story of the women that were part of the collective, getting the names of pregnant people and then referring them to abortion doctors. So the doctors that they had the contacts for would charge a lot of money, but they learned from one of the doctors that they knew how to perform abortions and provided abortions for as little as $100 or less if the patient couldn't pay that much. And so this was all illegal when they were doing this, but they still put their lives on the line. I mean, like their careers, their freedom on the line just to give other women access to this. And a bunch of the people involved in this got caught in 1972, and there was a story of how one of the women, she had index cards with the names and addresses and numbers of their patients. They ripped them up and just ate them to protect their identity. They were not charged because later, like very shortly after Roe v. Wade passed, but that is just an example of the fight that's been going on, that it was just that prevalent that people were already fighting for it. And they disbanded, of course, in 1973 because they weren't needed, because it was legal. Yeah.
So this was part of that whole context where there were women's liberation groups that were fighting for this sort of thing legally and in more direct action aspects in order to provide safe abortions. But in the meantime, people were dying. You know, this is a very different climate to say that you're anti-choice and you're pro-life in a climate where you haven't seen people dying of unsafe abortions in the past 50 years. Has it been 50 years? Gosh. And so, you know, we're really in a different historical moment. In the past few decades, partially on, you know, the sort of an evangelical furor that they have around abortion, the right wing has moved farther and farther right, and I think that's sort of where we've arrived today. Where in the early 1970s, in some ways they were more. The negative impacts of abortion being illegal was much more visible on the one hand, and on the other hand, there was a little bit less conservatism being quite so rampant. And still today, being pro-choice, abortion being legal is well into the majority. I think it's an average of 68 or 69% total, and you know it's a little bit more for women and a little bit less for men or something like that. But wildly popular still. And really, it's the vocal minority that has made this their legislative issue that has really pushed our politicians so far right on it. And so we have to come back with just as much force. And we have to demand that from Democrats. I'd actually like to briefly say that Dan Lipinski, for instance, is a Chicago Democrat. He's going to be speaking at the March for Life, the national one, which takes place in D.C. every year. So that'll be a week after the Chicago one. That's unacceptable to me. There's no reason we should also have to be fighting Democrats when we're fighting Republicans already. I don't think if you're an anti-choice Democrat, you should bother being a Democrat, and I don't think other Democrats should be supporting you.
Yeah. This defiance that people were so strongly showing in the streets and through actions, direct action like the Gene Project, is what we're going to be doing on Sunday and getting the word out that no, we're not going to back down. I would guess that actually because access is so poor that there are deaths and health problems being caused by the lack of access to abortions. So support Abortion on Demand. Come out this Sunday at 1 o'clock with all of us at Federal Plaza at Dearborn and Adams in downtown Chicago. And thank you for joining us here on the show, Mary and Laura.
Thank you so much.
So they're from Democratic Socialists of America. Also this week, coming up is beyond the action that we have on Sunday, is that there are going to be some hearings regarding the conspiracy trial related to the Laquan McDonald killing, the murder of Laquan McDonald, and potentially some real action is going to be decided on Thursday about that, and Friday the sentencing of Jason Van Dyke, the cop that murdered Laquan McDonald, is supposed to be announced. So prepare for that. And on Saturday, the 19th at noon, come out to Trump Tower and remind ourselves that this is the anniversary, the second anniversary of the President Trump, and we will be out there to show our disgust.